do find yourself with a dedicated, a full-time employee that has really as their own extreme ownership to make sure that employees do well in the company.
Welcome to Grow Think Tank. This is the one and only place where you will get insight from the founders and the CEOs of the fastest growing privately held companies. I am the host. My name is Gene Hammett. I help leaders and their teams navigate the defining moments of their growth. Are you ready to grow? Growing your people. How important is it for you to grow the people inside your organization? Well, today is a very special episode because I have been really looking for companies that really invest in their people, put their team first, and know the importance of giving them the right training, the right support as they grow and really support the overall organization. Stu Sjouwerman is the founder of KnowBe4. KnowBe4 is a technology company around how do users or individual people create the right security measures and protocols, and it becomes a human issue, not just a technology issue. And so I had him on the show to talk about why they invest in their people. Why do they get them to take ownership of the work? How they do that with stats and what they do with their growth team. This is a really special episode that I can't wait to share with you. Thanks for tuning in here to Growth Think Tank. Really excited about sharing this with you. And before you run, I have done so many interviews in the last few weeks. I have such an exciting time to share with you that those interviews have been organized into the 12 core principles of fast growth companies. So all you have to do to get that is go to genehammett.com/worksheet. So you can get the 12 principles, and I've been able to go in there and find which episodes will align to each individual episode. When you subscribe to Growth Think Tank, you will find exactly what you need so that you can move forward. And many of them haven't been published yet, depending on when you're hearing this, but you can tune in to the date that means the most to you. Now, here's the interview with Stu. Hi, Stu. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous. How are you?
Fantastic. Glad to have you here at Growth Think Tank. We're going to kick off this with a very easy question for you. Tell us a little bit about KnowBe4 and why that company exists today.
KnowBe4 is my fifth startup. What we do is we enable employees to make smarter security decisions. And why it exists is that just software layers for security simply don't cut it. You need a human layer on top of all your hardware and software security, hardware and software.
Well, that makes sense because, that weakest link may be the people that actually using the tools.
Definitely so. In my last company, we did build an antivirus, anti-spyware firewall product, and we had a couple of million endpoints out there, and the workstations still were getting infected with all kinds of malware all the time. This is how we identified that the human is a crucial element in this whole security picture.
Well, I appreciate you coming here to the show. I want to talk to you a little bit about the company growth. Just highlight some of the things that are in this. I'll kick this off with number 96 on the 2018 Inc. list. What else would you say about growing a fast company?
Hypergrowth is the most critical and also most risky phase in a company's life. I've seen dozens of high-tech companies either explode or implode during hypergrowth. This is a stage that needs to be managed very, very carefully. Otherwise, all kinds of mishap occurs.
Well, you've got 700 plus employees. So that's a lot of employees that you're managing. And I want to talk to you about some of the core aspects behind that. I have that about right? About 700 plus?
Yeah, we're pushing 800 now.
Fantastic. When you think about the core elements that are growing the business, we talked last week about some of these things, but you talked about the need for people to take ownership, go beyond responsibility and take real ownership for the work. How important does that have been to the overall success of the company?
It truly is crucial, and it starts at the top, but it does need to make its way all the way down. If an employee more like feels a business partner instead of just being there for a paycheck, that makes all the difference. So extreme ownership is one of our very important tenets which is to a certain degree driven by also radical transparency. Everyone knows and sees in real time how we're doing. Everyone knows break even. Everyone knows exactly when bonuses kick in. So you get alignment, which is the bigger you get, the more important it becomes.
Well, we'll take those pieces and break them apart. This ownership, when you had other businesses or you have teams that aren't taking ownership, what is something that you sense or see happening across the teams?
If teams do not take ownership for the total company result, you get teams that are becoming their own little unit, and they don't fit with the other parts of the company anymore. You get pissing contests between, for instance, tech support and sales, or between marketing and sales, or other groups. That's causing enormous amounts of lost time and lost production. So that's what you need to prevent from happening.
Now, you see this very commonly. We joke about it in big companies about the silos, but there's just no room for that in smaller companies I've seen.
No, and ideally there's no room for silos in large companies either. You really want to make sure that everyone truly understands where you're heading, and it doesn't matter if you're 500 or 5,000 employees.
Well, Stu just talked about silos. These silos happen in organizations big and small. And it really happens when people want to get territorial inside their roles, and that doesn't help the organization grow. In fact, it impedes growth. You know this. Small organizations don't put up with it. And if your organization has any pressure for producing these silos and people are trying to get territorial, then you really need to create the kind of organization where there's more collaboration. Sales and marketing should be working together as partners, not as kind of blaming each other for them not getting the job done, leads not being good enough, or them not closing the deals. They need to work to partners so that they truly are collaborating. Now, in other areas of the company, you have some of these silos that have a tendency. So your job as a leader is to identify them and create the kind of conversations that allow them to see that this is not the way we grow together. Now, that's my take on this. Now, hopefully you can do that inside your organizations. If you have any questions, make sure you reach out. Now, back to the interview with Stu. Well, what do you do in the onboarding process that lets people know that you really expect them to take ownership of their roles and the client experience? Is there anything special that you could share with us?
We have a fairly well-developed onboarding process. I actually send an email after 30 days to each individual new employee and ask how it was. We get pretty universal rave reviews of the onboarding process itself, simply because we take the time to make sure that someone gets our corporate culture. We do take the time to introduce us to our, it's almost our own dictionary, but at least it's critical words. Every profession develops their own, call it lingo, biology, physics, whatever. So InfoSec has their own highly developed dictionary with hundreds of terms. So we teach people the language.
When you think about the onboarding process, is there anything in there that you feel like you do unique that has had an impact on that first 30 days of the employees coming on board?
There's a lot of focus on the culture. Now, we're not unique in that, but it is rarely done. Part of being a 4-year in a row top workplace in Tampa Bay Times and having super high scores at Glassdoor shows that you really need to do that.
Well, beyond the onboarding process, how are your internal leaders and frontline leaders leading and inspiring people to take ownership of their work?
Well, we in KnowBe4 start the process by identifying what is your production on your specific post, and that is measured simply in a number of X number per day or per week or per month. In sales, of course, it's easy. You have your pipeline, but how do you create your pipeline? Well, it's calls out, emails out. Those are being actually counted. So everyone has a stat. Literally everyone in the company has a stat, and everyone else can see that stat. That's an internal application we've built. And so if your production is visible for everybody else, that right there strongly promotes extreme ownership.
And that ties back into the radical transparency, because if everyone else can see the stat, it doesn't take too long for people to realize they don't want to always be underperforming.
Yeah, it fosters a good sense of playing the game, competition, and nobody wants to be seen as a slacker.
When you think about creating these stats, like sales is easier, right? Is it truly just one measure, or does everyone have one or two or three measures?
Oh, some people have 6 stats.
Okay.
It really depends on the job.
And when you say make it available to everyone, is this a website, or is this some other type of mechanism to show where everyone stands on their stats?
It's an internal cloud-based application, which shows the org chart to begin with, and it shows exactly where everyone is on the org chart. You can query the org chart. You can find out where people are, phone number, email, who they report to, and what their stats are. Then the stats is a module where everyone enters their statistics, and then there is the OKR section that we started with 6 months ago. The objectives and key results, that's integrated in the app, so everyone sees exactly what the OKRs are for the other teams and can see where we're all heading.
Now, I love the fact that you can get everyone's key role down to a few stats, if you will. Is that something you learned from the other companies that you created, or did you create it new for KnowBe4? Yeah, no,
this is something, fortunately and unfortunately, you're looking at 40 years of experience in the IT world. I started professionally when I was 5. Once you focus on production, you start to see that people are truly, to some degree, it functions as a filter. People that are truly productive and happy and happy to produce, they have no problem whatsoever in showing their stats and putting them in on time. And people that are not productive and not happy are not really a good fit for company culture, so they don't make it ultimately.
Is there something that happens inside the kind of development process when someone's falling below their target numbers on those stats?
Sure, we have actually a whole team here. It's the growth team that is focused specifically on helping people who fall below the minimum production, and essentially go in and figure out what's happening. How can we turn this around? Essentially debug anything. It could be outside of their scope of responsibility. So then we debug what's the scene, in the sense of they don't get their tools, or they are in conflict with their manager, or whatever it is. We spend a lot of time trying to debug first before we say, listen, this is just not a good fit.
Similar to sorry, go ahead.
The other side of the coin there is we spend a lot of time making sure that we hire the right people. Out of 3,000 resumes per month, we hire maybe 15 people. So this is 0.5% of 1% that actually get hired.
That's impressive. I was going to go back to that debugging. You know, being in the technology world, you debug programs, you're debugging the process on a consistent basis so that people are growing individually, but also just seeing where you're out of alignment. Is that fair?
Yeah. Debugging a person obviously is to some degree tongue in cheek, but it does boil down to figure out what's going on. Where is the problem? Where is the real problem? What is the actual why are they not producing? And when you find the correct why, you can then go about fixing the problem.
You mentioned the growth team. I'd love to know how many people kind of that makes up at this point with almost 800 employees, but where did you start with that team? Is it just one person?
A small group. Let me go to the org chart for a moment and do a quick count. So we have the growth sector here. We have our chief growth officer. Count with me, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6. That's including, of course, internal training, our internal training team. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and third one, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. There you go. So out of 826 people focused on internal training and growth.
Fantastic. The skills of this team, it sounds like there's a lot of different people inside there training and whatnot, but I've never heard of a chief growth officer. When did that come on board for the company?
Early stage. When you start, I started literally in a 10 by 10 broom closet and I was wearing 50 hats, right? I created the product, I did the marketing, I sold it, I followed up, I called when I didn't get paid, and I put the check in the bank, right? So over time, you delegate those functions. Over time, though, you do find yourself with a dedicated, a full-time employee that has really as their own extreme ownership to make sure that employees do well in the company. And so I think with about 100, I had an FTE dedicated to just that.
I love that. It's the first time I've ever heard it, and I think that's a really big kind of opportunity for companies to ensure that people are developing. I can't remember who said it, but there's a quote out there about investing in people. You could either not invest in them and they'll stay. Some may leave, but it really does hurt the company by not investing in the people. And I think you've seen that.
Absolutely. You have to, because ultimately, despite what other people claim, they can say, oh, it's your IP, it's your brand, it's your patents. No, ultimately IP and are assets, but the most important element in your company obviously are always people and always will be.
Hold on for a second. Stu just said something brilliant. When you talk about putting people first and you talk about creating a team first organization, you want to make sure that you are really taking care of the people and that they feel that inside the organization. You're investing in them. They're growing as people and as their skills and their value. That is truly something that you want to create inside of a business that's running fast. Stu's organization is adding hundreds of people every year. They're really creating a huge valuation inside the market force. They're creating all of this going on, and there's no question in my mind that there's a correlation between how much they invest in people and how much they are getting in return in the valuation of the company. So back to the interview with Stu. The business of finding these stats for people so that they understand where they are, that's got to give them a sense of ownership for where they're going and that they actually have to do whatever work it takes, whether it be learn a new skill, spend a few extra hours doing it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. The growth team actually is responsible for identifying and those statistics to train people what they are and how to get those production. A stat really only reflects production, right? It's the same in sports. We tend to say we're the NFL. So the stat is identified as, okay, this is the final result that we expect you to get. We pay people extremely well over here. And like the NFL, you're a top player. We like to think we're only A players here.
Well, I've had some interviews on a podcast before talking about the reasons why we only hire 10s. Was a very good interview recently, and you're another person that really sees the value of hiring the best of the best. And I guess you can do that when you have 3,000 applications. Is there any magic to getting so many applications in an area like Tampa that may not even have that big of a workforce?
Well, you'd be surprised. The whole Tampa Bay area has an easy 5, 6, 7 million people living here. Yeah. We have more than 100 open positions as we speak, but there is no magic. That is just a lot of hard work, creating a fabulous corporate culture, making it fun for everyone to come to work, transparency. One thing that I would like to highlight is that everyone understands what their break-even is, what our break-even is. And then the first moment we do break that even is everyone gets a $100 bill. This is hard cash in hand. And then the next million up is $200 cash in hand. So on average, we pay $1,000 a month in cash bonus as an instant profit share, which is a super fun game to play.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. I would like to ask you this question, Stu. As a leader, you mentioned decades of experience in the IT world, running 5 different businesses. What is one defining moment in your leadership where you made a big realization that you were growing or needed to grow as a leader?
The moment when I decided to give away half my company to my business partner, Kevin Mitnick. I, in the early days, came to the conclusion, well, I can own 100% of a muffin, or I can own 50% of a really large pie. And after 1 or 2 days of chewing on that, I decided, okay, I'm going to give away half the company. And that was the right choice.
That does take a lot of courage. I guess you knew this person well.
Kevin Mitnick is the world's most famous hacker, so he's an extremely well-known quantity.
Fantastic. Well, Stu, I really appreciate you being here at Growth Think Tank, sharing some of the inside strategies to fast growth. I really appreciate you sharing your defining moments with us, and really appreciate your wisdom and your insight.
You are very welcome.
Wow, what a great episode. This content in here really aligns with the research I've done with hundreds of fast growth leaders about how important it is for people to take ownership and not just responsibility for their work, about for them to really embrace transparency inside the workforce, and really radical transparency is what our companies really crave, and employees are growing through that radical transparency. And there's so many other elements inside here. Hopefully you took copious notes and you've really found something that you can latch onto. Do one thing from this interview and you will see the benefit. I really appreciate having people like Stu on the show. So if you know of anyone else that could fit this during the Inc. 500, make sure you tell them about this show, that they must listen in, and that they can actually get a chance to be on the show if they reach out to me. And if you have anyone else that would love to hear this information about, the power of evolving as a leader, then make sure you tell them about Growth Think Tank. As always, lead with courage. We'll see you next time.